There's a hallway in my mother's house that I used to pass through 100 times a day without thinking, but late at night, when the world outside was silent and the only sound inside came from the faint hum of the refrigerator or the creak of old floorboards under shifting weight, that hallway became something else entirely. It became a place I stood in front of the mirror for far too long, just watching myself breathe. That mirror, cracked slightly in the corner from an old accident no one ever fixed, stared back at me like it was waiting for me to ask myself the one question I kept trying to avoid: what's wrong with me? There's no preparation for the kind of loneliness that creeps in slowly, without warning, until it fills a room and takes up the space where laughter used to live. No one tells you how, over time, silence becomes a companion, and pretending becomes second nature, especially when you're not sure who would actually care enough to look past the performance and ask if you're okay. Some secrets don't come from a single moment, or one terrible decision. They form in pieces, shaped by years of isolation, quiet disappointments, and the slow erosion of boundaries that once felt permanent, but eventually begin to crack under the weight of everything you were never allowed to say. The day my mom caught me, was the day everything shifted, but not in the explosive, angry, tear-filled kind of way most people expect when they hear a line like that. It didn't happen with yelling or judgment or punishment. It happened with a pause. A silence that said more than words ever could. And then, it happened with help. Not the kind of help you'd expect. Not the kind you ask for. Not the kind that feels entirely okay. And before you jump to conclusions, or fill in the blanks with something outrageous, I'll stop you right here. This story doesn't follow the rules. It doesn't give you a villain to hate, or a hero to root for, or a clean line between right and wrong. It gives you a house where the grief never fully left, and a mother who never really healed, and a son who got lost somewhere between boyhood and manhood, looking for connection in all the places no one warned him about. This isn't a story about seduction. It's not about forbidden pleasure or reckless choices meant to shock. It's about what happens when people live in the same house, see each other every day, but stop really seeing each other at all. Before I go further, I want to be clear: this story contains themes that might make you uncomfortable. It talks about emotional abandonment, blurred relationships, and infidelity. If these things are too much, or if you're not ready to listen without judgment, it's okay to stop right here. No hard feelings. But if you've ever found yourself feeling unseen in your own home, if you've ever felt so hollow that you reached out to someone, anyone, even when you knew it wasn't the right choice, then maybe, just maybe, this story will sound less like a scandal and more like the kind of truth that's been living in the shadows for too long. My name is Ronan Quintana. And this is the part of my life I never thought I'd say out loud. But somehow, now feels like the right time. There's something strange about a house after the man of it is gone. The silence doesn't arrive all at once, it settles in piece by piece, like dust you don't notice until it coats everything. After my father, Charles Morgan, passed, the Quintana house didn't fall into chaos or grief or screaming matches, it just grew quiet. Painfully quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that hums under your skin and makes your own breath feel like a violation. At first, people came around. Neighbors with casseroles. Relatives with stiff hugs. Everyone with a look in their eyes like they didn't know whether to offer comfort or just tiptoe around the mess. But after a few weeks, the phone stopped ringing. The visits dried up. People moved on. And the house stood still. My mom, Theodora, she didn't cry. Not in front of me. Not once. She just got up earlier and went to bed later. Started wearing darker clothes. Cooked smaller meals. Talked less. If grief made her weak, I never saw it. But it made her different. And over time, that difference grew into distance. She wasn't angry. She wasn't mean. She was just unavailable. Present in body, absent in everything else. Our conversations became purely transactional. Do you need anything from the store? The mortgage is due on the 10th. There's food in the fridge. Not once did she ask how I was sleeping. Or if I'd eaten. Or if I missed him. But the truth is, I didn't know how to answer those questions anyway. I did miss him. But I also missed her, the version of her that used to brush the hair off my forehead, who used to laugh at my dumb impressions of Dad's terrible dance moves, who used to sit in my room on nights I couldn't sleep just so I wouldn't feel like I was losing my mind in the dark. And somewhere between my high school graduation and my 24th birthday, it became easier to stop trying to bring her back. Most nights, we didn't even eat in the same room. She'd pour a glass of wine, sit in front of her tablet with her feet curled beneath her, and stare into the screen like it held the answers to everything she wouldn't say out loud. And I'd sit in the kitchen, eating leftovers, pretending I didn't hear the creak of the stairs when she tiptoed past my door, checking to see if I was still up. We existed like strangers with shared Wi-Fi and a mortgage. And then there was Kenya. Kenya Rivera had been my girlfriend for 3 years, but lately, it felt like I was dating a voicemail box. She was always just getting out of something, too tired, too busy, or not in the mood to talk right now. The spark between us didn't dim overnight. But I swear it slipped through my fingers like sand, and by the time I noticed how empty her texts had become, we were already pretending we hadn't grown into different people. She used to ask about my day. Now she double-tapped my photos and replied with a thumbs-up emoji. She used to light up when she saw me. Now she avoided eye contact and flinched when I tried to touch her shoulder. She used to stay the night. Now she left right after dinner and said she had an early morning. And the worst part? I didn't even have the energy to confront her. I just nodded, smiled, told her to sleep well, and watched her leave. Every time. It felt pathetic. I felt pathetic. But I told myself it was better than being alone. Except I was already alone. The irony of being surrounded by people and feeling invisible is something I wouldn't wish on anyone. I wasn't asking for grand declarations of love or attention, I just wanted to feel seen. Heard. Even once. Just one moment where someone, anyone, looked me in the eye and said, "I know you're not okay." But no one ever did. Not Kenya. Not Theodora. Not even Makai, my closest friend since middle school, who noticed I was quieter lately but assumed I was just tired. Everyone was too busy, too wrapped up in their own noise, to notice the way I was unraveling quietly in corners of the house no one bothered to check anymore. Theodora and I, we coexisted like furniture. Clothes in space. Distant in soul. I called her mom out of habit, not connection. She responded to me with politeness, not affection. It was like we were both waiting for the other person to crack open first, to break the spell, to say something real. But we never did. There was this one evening, raining, cold, that kind of gray light outside that makes the walls look blue. I walked into the living room. She was sitting there, curled up in the same blanket Dad used to use, sipping tea without sugar. I stood there for a moment, wanting to say something. Anything. I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. She looked up, gave me a small nod, then looked back at her book. That was the closest we came to a connection that week. It's easy to blame other people when you feel this lost. But the truth is, I wasn't reaching out either. I wasn't knocking on her door. I wasn't asking Kenya to talk. I was bottling it all up and pretending the ache would just go away if I ignored it long enough. But it didn't go away. It sat in my chest like a rock. It built up in my throat like cement. And late at night, when I stood in front of that cracked hallway mirror, it stared back at me with eyes that looked exactly like mine, but hollow. I wanted someone to notice me. I wanted someone to say, "I know you feel alone, but I'm still here." And when that didn't happen, I started looking in the worst places for that comfort. And that's when things started to go wrong. If you're still with me, don't forget to like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more stories like this. Trust me, there's so much more to uncover. There's a moment, somewhere between longing and despair, where you stop looking for love and start settling for something that just resembles it. You start confusing the glow of a screen with the warmth of a body. The sound of a stranger whispering with the comfort of being held. It's not lust. It's not even desire. It's hunger. Deep, aching hunger for closeness. For connection. For someone to notice that you're slipping. That's where I found myself. I didn't wake up one day and decide to fall into the habit of watching things I wouldn't be proud of. It crept in slowly, like everything else. It started with boredom. Then loneliness. Then routine. At first, it was just a distraction, something to make the hours pass in a house that had long stopped feeling like home. But then it became more than that. Not about the content. Not about the thrill. About the illusion. There were these videos I found. Nothing too explicit, at first, but they had a kind of emotional weight to them. Not the usual stuff. These were different. Softer. Slower. Two people actually looking at each other. Touching gently. Whispering things that sounded real. Saying I missed you. Saying I'm here. And in some twisted way, I started to believe they were talking to me. I'd turn off all the lights in my room. Pull the blanket up around me, like I used to when I was a kid. And I'd let the voices from the screen fill the silence my house refused to break. I wasn't watching for release, I was watching for relief. For something that made me feel human again. Wanted. Chosen. Meanwhile, Kenya was slipping further and further away. The texts turned into one-word replies. The phone calls stopped altogether. If I didn't reach out, days would pass without hearing from her. And even when I did, she felt distracted. Like her mind was always somewhere else, talking to someone else, loving someone else. I asked her if something was wrong. She said she was just overwhelmed with work. I offered to come over and bring food. She told me not to worry about it. I asked if she still loved me. She didn't answer right away. And that pause said everything. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I didn't beg. I just said okay. And hung up. That night, I didn't even try to sleep. Instead, I found myself searching for something, anything, that would remind me what closeness felt like. That's when I started seeking out those videos with voices like lullabies and touches that looked like they meant something. I wasn't even touching myself most of the time. Just watching. Just trying to feel something that didn't hurt. And then, there was Delilah. Delilah Chapman had been around our family for years. She was one of those warm, magnetic people who made you feel safe the moment they looked at you. The kind of woman who gave long hugs and actually meant them. She was in her late 30s, always smelled like vanilla and clean laundry, and she had this way of tilting her head when she listened that made you feel like every word you said mattered. She used to visit more often when Dad was alive, mostly during the holidays, always helping in the kitchen, telling funny stories, laughing with her whole face. But after he passed, she faded out a bit, only coming by once or twice a year to check on Mom, or to bring by a pie from some new bakery she was excited about. The last time she visited, she stayed for dinner. I remember watching her laugh at something Theodora said, this rare, genuine moment where two women who'd both lost something found comfort in each other's company. And I remember feeling jealous. Not of them, but of the space between them. The ease. The warmth. Delilah looked at me when I spoke. She asked follow-up questions. She remembered things I said. And when she hugged me goodbye that night, her hand lingered on my back just a second longer than expected. I don't know if it meant anything. Maybe it didn't. But in my head, it became something. She became something. And that was the beginning of a new kind of obsession. Not with her body. But with the idea of her. The possibility. The fantasy that maybe someone like her could actually see me, want me, not out of obligation or pity, but because she chose to. I started thinking about her more during those late-night viewing sessions. I'd close my eyes and imagine it was her voice saying those soft things. Her hands reaching. Her warmth filling the cold space around me. And then, the moment I wish I could erase. It was a Sunday night. Rain outside. House quiet. I was in my room, door barely shut, too far gone in my own mind to double check. The screen was glowing. My headphones were off. My breathing was heavy, but not loud. I didn't even hear the footsteps. The door creaked open, just an inch. I turned my head. And there she was. My mom. Theodora. She didn't scream. She didn't say a word. She just stood there. Frozen. Eyes wide. Face unreadable. Time stretched. I pulled the blanket over myself so fast it nearly tore. My whole body went cold. My skin flushed. My mouth opened, but no words came out. She just looked at me, briefly, then closed the door without a sound. I sat there, shaking. Couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. The shame hit harder than anything I'd ever felt. Not because of what I was doing. But because she saw me. Not the mask. Not the version I kept together for the world. But the hollowed out, needy version. The version desperate for something I didn't know how to name. The next morning, I didn't come out of my room. Didn't eat. Didn't check my phone. I waited for the confrontation. For the scolding. For the cold shoulder. I waited for the words I was sure would burn through me. But they never came. It wasn't until 2 days later, when I finally walked into the kitchen, pale and exhausted and prepared for war, that she looked up from her mug and said, quietly, almost too softly, "Are you okay?" That's all she said. No judgment. No anger. Just that. And something in me cracked. I wanted to lie. To laugh it off. To pretend it didn't happen. But instead, I nodded. And said, "I don't know." And then we both went silent again. That was the first time in years she asked me something that wasn't about bills or groceries or schedules. And somehow, it scared me more than if she'd yelled. Something shifted that day in the kitchen, not loudly, not dramatically, not in a way that someone else might have noticed, but for me, it was like the air had changed. My mother didn't accuse me. She didn't lecture. She didn't even look away. She just asked if I was okay, and the weight of that simple question, coming from her, after so long, hit me like a quiet kind of thunder. I didn't know how to answer. I didn't even know what part of me needed to be okay. Was it the part that missed my father? The part that felt abandoned by Kenya? The part that couldn't sleep without a screen glowing in the dark and a fantasy to fall into? All I could manage was that I didn't know. And that was the first truth I had spoken aloud in months. She nodded slowly, like she understood more than she let on. And then she did something I hadn't expected. She poured me a cup of tea. Not in a motherly, doting way. Not with any exaggerated kindness or forced sweetness. Just poured it, slid it across the table, and sat down across from me. We didn't talk much. But she stayed. We sipped in silence. It was the first time in a long while that her presence felt like comfort instead of obligation. That night, she knocked gently on my bedroom door, something she hadn't done in years, and asked if we could talk for a minute. I froze. Every nerve in my body told me to say no, to bury myself back in my headphones, to pretend I was asleep. But something inside me said yes. Maybe curiosity. Maybe hope. She sat on the edge of my bed, hands folded in her lap, her posture both stiff and fragile. There was a pause, a long one, and then she said, almost in a whisper, "You know." I wasn't shocked. I turned my head, confused. "I wasn't shocked," she repeated. "Not because of what you were doing, but because of how familiar it felt to see someone so alone." I didn't know what she meant until she kept speaking. She told me that after Charles, after Dad, passed, she didn't just lose a husband. She lost the only person who ever really made her feel like she mattered as a woman, not just as someone who kept the house running. She said the loneliness didn't hit all at once. It came in pieces. Through the silence of no one calling her beautiful. No one asking how her day went. No one reaching for her hand just because. I felt invisible, she said. Even to myself. Hearing those words from her, my mother, the woman I thought had just checked out emotionally because she didn't care, made my throat tighten. For the first time, I realized we were both ghosts in the same house, haunting each other from opposite ends of the hallway. We were both pretending to be fine. Both hiding in plain sight. She asked if I had thought about seeing someone. A therapist, maybe. Someone trained to help make sense of all this. And to be honest, I hadn't. The idea of spilling my thoughts to a stranger felt impossible. But when she said it, when she looked at me not with judgment but with concern, real, human concern, it made me consider that maybe I didn't have to keep drowning in silence. We didn't hug. We didn't cry. But that night, she sat with me for over an hour, just talking. About Dad. About the way he used to make pancakes on Saturdays and burn half of them on purpose just to make her laugh. About the way his laugh used to fill the kitchen. About the quiet that replaced it. About how sometimes, at night, she would walk into his old closet just to smell what was left of him on the jackets he never got to throw out. I listened, not just with my ears, but with every part of me that had been starving for connection. And something unspoken began forming between us, not something inappropriate, not something physical. But something strangely intimate. Something raw. Something close. In the days that followed, she started knocking on my door more. Sometimes with food. Sometimes with no reason at all. She suggested we go through some old boxes of Dad's things together, sort out what to keep, what to donate. We ended up watching a few home videos instead, ones I hadn't seen since I was a kid. There was one where I was about 8, dancing in the living room in oversized socks while Dad tried to mimic my moves, and Mom laughed so hard she nearly dropped the camera. We sat on the couch, shoulder to shoulder, watching those memories replay, and for a moment, it felt like the house breathed again. Like the air had color. Like we weren't strangers anymore. She cooked more after that. And she started asking me to join her. We'd chop vegetables in silence, occasionally glancing at each other, passing things back and forth, occasionally laughing at how bad I was at peeling garlic. One night, she wiped a smudge of flour from my cheek, then quickly pulled her hand back like she'd touched something too hot. Neither of us said anything. But we both felt it. That tension. That closeness. That strange new bond that was forming in a place that had once felt so hollow. I knew it wasn't normal. I knew it wasn't the kind of closeness mothers and sons usually shared. But it didn't feel wrong either. It just felt needed. Like two people learning to lean on each other in a world that had forgotten them. And then Delilah came by again. She dropped in one Saturday afternoon with a fresh pie, smiling as always, arms open, eyes warm. But this time, she looked at us differently. We were sitting close on the couch, laughing about something silly, an old inside joke from when I was a teenager. And Delilah paused. Tilted her head. Gave that look people give when they're not sure if they're intruding or witnessing something they weren't meant to see. She didn't say anything. Not that day. But the air between us shifted. And for the first time, I started to wonder what we must look like from the outside. There's a stillness that settles into the air just before something you can't undo happens. Not like the sudden crash of a broken glass or the jarring ring of a phone in the middle of the night. This kind of stillness is soft, almost delicate, but it stretches over your skin like static, telling you, without words, that what you're about to do will echo long after the moment ends. It was late. The kind of late where the house feels like it's folded in on itself. I couldn't sleep. Again. Theodora had gone upstairs after dinner, quiet as always, but not cold. Just tired. I could hear the familiar sound of her slippers sliding gently against the floorboards above me, followed by the soft click of her bedroom door. And then, nothing. I sat in the living room for a while, just listening to the hum of the ceiling fan and the occasional creak of the old couch beneath me. I hadn't even noticed how long it had been since I checked my phone. Not that it mattered. Kenya hadn't texted me in over a day. Our last exchange had been a dry exchange of logistics, what time we'd meet for lunch next week, whether I'd be bringing anything to her friend's housewarming. Not a single question about how I'd been. Not one word that sounded like she missed me. I told myself not to care. I told myself to stop expecting warmth from a flame that had long since died out. But expectations are stubborn. Even when you stop speaking them, they wait inside you like echoes, begging to be heard. I was about to go upstairs when there was a knock on the door, soft, deliberate. I hesitated, confused, and opened it to find Delilah standing there, wrapped in a long cardigan, holding a small paper bag in one hand and a tentative smile in the other. She said she was in the area, had picked up too much from the bakery, thought we might like some. I invited her in. Of course I did. The warmth she brought with her was subtle but noticeable. She moved through our home like someone who belonged, not forcefully, not arrogantly, but like someone who had known its rhythm before the grief turned the lights down. We sat on the couch, the same one where she'd seen me with Theodora just days before. She placed the bag on the coffee table. Inside were 2 slices of honey cake and a note from the bakery scribbled in blue ink. She said she didn't want to intrude, but the truth was, she didn't need an invitation to linger. We started talking, quietly at first. The kind of talk people have when they're trying to avoid saying what they're really thinking. She asked about work, about Kenya, about how I was holding up. I gave half answers, told her I was fine, that everything was alright, even though we both knew it wasn't. And then, after a long pause, she said, "You've changed, Ronan." I can feel it. I didn't know how to respond. I looked at her, and for the first time, I didn't try to deflect. I didn't try to smile. I just exhaled and said, "I'm tired of being alone." There was a silence after that, a thick one. She didn't look away. And when she placed her hand gently over mine, it didn't feel inappropriate. It felt human. Real. Dangerous. We sat like that for a while, hands touching, eyes locked. And then she leaned in. It wasn't fast. It wasn't aggressive. It was slow, almost hesitant, like she was waiting for me to pull away. But I didn't. Our lips met, soft at first, then with more weight, more urgency. I didn't resist. My mind screamed that I should, but my body didn't listen. And in that moment, all the pain, all the neglect, all the loneliness I'd buried came rushing to the surface, and I clung to her like a man lost at sea. It wasn't long. A few minutes, maybe. But it was long enough to change everything. When we pulled apart, we didn't say anything right away. Her eyes searched mine, and I could see that she wasn't sure what came next. Neither was I. She reached for her purse, said she should go, and I nodded. I didn't walk her out. I didn't hug her. I just sat there while the door clicked shut behind her, and the house fell silent again. That night, sleep didn't come. I lay in bed with my eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling like it might collapse on me. Guilt crawled into every corner of my mind, settling in like smoke that wouldn't clear. I had betrayed Kenya, even if she hadn't been present. Even if she'd already left me in every way except physically. I had betrayed Theodora, even though she hadn't seen. Even though we hadn't spoken about anything real since that night in my room. I had betrayed the version of myself I thought I was still holding on to, the one who knew better, who had restraint, who didn't need to seek out affection like a thirsty animal begging for a drop of water. But worst of all, I couldn't bring myself to regret it. Not fully. And that's what wrecked me the most. In the days that followed, I tried to wear the mask again. I smiled when I needed to. I answered questions. I cleaned the dishes. I kept things moving. But underneath, I was unraveling. Every glance from Theodora made my skin itch. Every silence felt accusatory. And every message from Kenya reminded me how far we'd drifted from what we once were. She must have sensed it, because one evening, out of nowhere, she called. It was already past 10. I picked up, unsure what to expect. "Is everything okay with us?" she asked. No preamble. No small talk. Just that. I paused too long before answering. She noticed. "You've been distant," she said. "I mean, I know we've both been busy. But lately, it's like you're somewhere else even when we're on the phone." I told her I was tired. That I'd been dealing with some things at home. That I was just off. She didn't accuse. She didn't yell. But there was something in her voice, something brittle. "Are you seeing someone else?" she asked, almost in a whisper. I said no. Quickly. Too quickly. She didn't press. But I could tell she didn't believe me. We ended the call with empty promises. "I'll call you tomorrow, let's talk more this weekend, I miss you too." But I knew, deep down, that something inside both of us had quietly broken long before Delilah ever walked through our door. There are moments when time does not bend or stretch, it simply stops, quietly, without sound or spectacle, as if holding its breath alongside you, waiting to see whether everything you've tried so hard to keep hidden will finally come pouring out or remain lodged just beneath the surface like a splinter too deep to reach. That moment, for me, came in the form of a small, glowing screen left carelessly on a kitchen counter, unguarded, unlocked, and quietly damning. It hadn't even occurred to me to double-check it. I'd grown comfortable with the silence between us, confident in the idea that we were finally understanding each other in a way that didn't require words or scrutiny. But trust has a strange way of highlighting the places where we're still broken, and all it took was one message, just one line of text, for everything we had built, or imagined we were building, to shift. Delilah's name on the screen. A simple, cutting sentence: "Last night was a mistake, but I can't stop thinking about you." I hadn't heard her approach. I hadn't known she was in the kitchen. I only remember walking in, feeling the chill in the air before I even saw her, Theodora, standing still, her eyes fixed on the phone, her fingers curled around its sides like it was something both foreign and familiar, something that belonged to her son but carried a truth she hadn't asked to find. When she looked at me, there was no explosion, no raised voice, no sharp words, no dramatic accusations. Her expression wasn't even one of fury or disgust. It was something quieter. Something worse. A look I had never seen from her before, and one I pray I never see again. She looked like someone who had just confirmed their worst fear, not about the world, or about the people outside her walls, but about her own child. And then she said, softly, as if speaking to herself more than to me, "I knew something was missing, but I didn't expect it to be you." She didn't wait for a reply. She didn't ask for clarification. She just walked past me, slowly, carefully, like her very breath had become too fragile to carry the weight of what she had seen. And I stood there, frozen in place, shame burning through me like acid, my throat too tight to speak, my chest too heavy to hold any air. The silence didn't just fill the room, it buried me, pressed itself into my skin, made my feet feel like they were chained to the floorboards. I wanted to chase after her, to explain, to apologize, to rewind time to a place before that message ever existed, before I had ever reached out in desperation and found Delilah waiting there. But I didn't move. I couldn't. I just stayed in the kitchen long after she was gone, staring down at the countertop as though the grain in the wood might rearrange itself into an answer. That night was long, and cruel in the way only silence between two people who love each other can be. The house didn't creak. The lights didn't flicker. It just stayed still, suffocatingly still. And I didn't sleep, not even for a minute. I lay awake, going over every mistake, every moment, every sign I had ignored, and every emotion I had buried beneath false calm. Theodora didn't come to my room. She didn't knock. She didn't text. And somehow, that hurt more than anything she could have screamed. It wasn't until late the next morning, long after I had stopped expecting her to speak to me, that she entered my room without a word and sat down quietly in the chair by the window, her hands clasped in her lap, her expression unreadable. She didn't look at me right away, but when she did, her eyes were softer than I expected, though still clouded with something I couldn't fully name, disappointment, maybe, but also sadness, and something else beneath it, something that looked like grief. "I should have seen it," she said, her voice low, but steady, each word pronounced with the kind of care that comes from deep reflection. "I saw the way you were pulling away. I saw the late nights, the quiet meals, the way you looked at the floor more than you looked at people. And I told myself it was a phase. That you'd come through it on your own. That you didn't need me hovering." She paused, letting the silence sit again, but this time it wasn't empty, it was full of all the things we hadn't said in years. "I thought," she continued, her fingers trembling slightly, "if I gave you space, you'd find your footing again. But I didn't give you space. I gave you absence. And I'm sorry, Ronan. I really am." I wanted to speak, but the lump in my throat refused to move, and instead, I just nodded, eyes burning, heart pounding, unsure of how to hold all the guilt that was rising inside me like a tide I could no longer control. "I never meant to drift from you," I said finally, voice cracking. "But I didn't know how to say it. That I needed something. That I was empty. That I didn't feel like I belonged anywhere, not even in my own skin." She nodded then, and tears finally began to slide down her cheeks, not fast, not dramatic, just quiet, steady, like a faucet someone forgot to shut off. "You don't need anyone to validate your worth," she said, and for the first time, I could hear the truth in her voice, layered with years of her own ache, her own regrets, her own longing to be seen. "Not even me." And that was the moment I lost it. Not just the tears, but everything I had held in. The anger. The grief. The guilt. The unbearable ache of being unwanted, unchosen, misunderstood. I cried in a way I hadn't since I was a child. Loud, heaving sobs that shook my shoulders and made me feel like my insides were cracking open. She didn't rush to hold me. She didn't try to fix it. She just sat there, watching me fall apart, and in her silence, I felt, for the first time in a long time, completely and undeniably seen. We didn't talk about Delilah after that. There was nothing left to say. She didn't ask for the details. She didn't try to dissect my motives. She just sat with me in the wreckage, and together, we let the silence heal rather than hide. That morning didn't repair everything. It didn't erase the mistake, or the pain, or the months of distance we had both allowed to grow. But it was real. And in a house where everything had felt numb for so long, real was more than I ever thought we'd find again. Healing didn't come to me all at once, and it certainly didn't arrive wrapped in comfort or clarity. It crept in slowly, in the quiet moments between grief and growth, often disguised as uncomfortable truths I didn't want to face and conversations I never thought I would have the courage to begin. It started in a small office, with soft light and a woman named Anaya Henderson, who sat across from me without expectation, without judgment, and who somehow knew that what I needed most wasn't a solution, but space. In the beginning, I wasn't sure what to say. I stumbled through vague confessions and half-finished thoughts, offering her only the safest parts of my story, afraid that if I spoke the whole truth out loud, even she would look at me with the same quiet disappointment I had seen in my mother's eyes. But Anaya didn't flinch. She listened. She nodded. And with remarkable patience, she helped me peel back the layers I had wrapped around myself for protection, layers made of silence, shame, and the strange, aching belief that needing love made me weak. Through those sessions, I began to understand that what had happened with Delilah wasn't just a matter of lust or betrayal. It was rooted in something deeper, something far more tangled. It was about neglect, not just from others, but from myself. It was about longing that had gone unanswered for too long, and the desperate, human instinct to fill that void with anyone who offered warmth. Anaya helped me name the feelings I had spent years avoiding: emotional starvation, blurred boundaries, shame masked as resilience, and the kind of neediness that makes you cling to the first person who pays attention. Eventually, I knew what I had to do. I met Delilah at a quiet cafe, one of those places with soft music and small tables that force you to sit close, to look people in the eye, to face whatever it is you've come to say. She smiled when she saw me, but there was a guardedness in her expression, like she already sensed that the story we'd written together, however brief, however complicated, was coming to a close. I didn't waste time. I told her the truth, gently but clearly. I wasn't with you because I loved you. I was with you because I needed someone. She didn't cry. She didn't argue. She just looked down at her cup of tea, nodded slowly, and said, "I know." And somehow, that was enough. Closure, I've learned, doesn't always arrive with dramatic exits or poetic endings. Sometimes, it comes quietly, like two people recognizing they were never meant to be permanent, only passing. Kenya deserved the truth, too. I met her at a park near her apartment, where the wind carried the early scent of fall and the benches were empty enough to give us the privacy we hadn't had in months. I told her everything, about Delilah, about the lies, about the pain that had pushed me into someone else's arms. She didn't raise her voice or ask for details. She just let me speak. And when I finished, she looked at me, not with rage, but with a softness that surprised me, and said, "Thank you for being honest. We were broken long before this." Then she stood, gave me a faint smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, and walked away. That was the last time I saw her. I didn't chase her. I didn't beg. I simply let her go, knowing that sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone you once loved is to give them the freedom to leave you. Theodora and I never spoke directly about what happened with Delilah again. We didn't need to. That part of the story had burned itself out, and all that remained were the ashes, quiet, weightless, and no longer capable of hurting us. What mattered now was what we did with the time we had left, how we rebuilt something from the parts of ourselves that hadn't been too damaged to salvage. We began sharing meals again, not just food, but real time, real presence. Sometimes we talked about trivial things, the weather, the grocery list, a memory that popped into her mind without warning. Other times, we sat in silence, allowing the quiet to be something other than a punishment. It felt new, and in its own way, it felt sacred. Eventually, I decided to move out, not as an escape, but as an act of growth. It was time. I needed to build something of my own, to rediscover who I was outside the grief, outside the guilt, outside the boundaries that had been blurred too long. Theodora didn't protest. She helped me pack. She labeled the boxes with careful handwriting. And on the day I left, she hugged me, not tight, not long, but real. I started journaling after that. At first, it felt awkward, forced, like I was trying to translate thoughts into a language I barely understood. But over time, it became a habit, pages filled with questions, confessions, moments of clarity, and even hope. There was something healing about seeing my own pain on paper, something liberating about knowing I could look at it without turning away. I'm not perfect now. I still have hard days. I still carry regrets. But for the first time, I don't feel like I'm pretending. I feel like I'm living. And that, more than anything, feels like a beginning. Sometimes, the people who catch us at our worst end up helping us become our best. If you've ever felt like no one noticed you. If you've ever gone to bed beside someone who didn't really see you. If you've ever reached for something, or someone. Not because you wanted to betray what you had, but because you were drowning in silence. Then maybe this story made you feel something you've been too scared to admit. So let me ask you, honestly, without judgment, what would you do if someone you loved crossed a line, but came to you not with excuses, but with open hands, asking for help instead of punishment? Would you shut the door? Would you forgive them? Would you even know how to begin the conversation? I'm not here to tell you what's right or wrong. I'm just here to say, you're not alone. Not in your mistakes. Not in your healing. Not in your confusion. If this story touched you in any way, please take a second to like, share, and subscribe. It lets us know these stories matter. Theodora and I never spoke directly about what happened with Delilah again. We didn't need to. That part of the story had burned itself out, and all that remained were the ashes, quiet, weightless, and no longer capable of hurting us. What mattered now was what we did with the time we had left, how we rebuilt something from the parts of ourselves that hadn't been too damaged to salvage. We began sharing meals again, not just food, but real time, real presence. Sometimes we talked about trivial things, the weather, the grocery list, a memory that popped into her mind without warning. Other times, we sat in silence, allowing the quiet to be something other than a punishment. It felt new, and in its own way, it felt sacred. Eventually, I decided to move out, not as an escape, but as an act of growth. It was time. I needed to build something of my own, to rediscover who I was outside the grief, outside the guilt, outside the boundaries that had been blurred too long. Theodora didn't protest. She helped me pack. She labeled the boxes with careful handwriting. And on the day I left, she hugged me, not tight, not long, but real. I started journaling after that. At first, it felt awkward, forced, like I was trying to translate thoughts into a language I barely understood. But over time, it became a habit, pages filled with questions, confessions, moments of clarity, and even hope. There was something healing about seeing my own pain on paper, something liberating about knowing I could look at it without turning away. I'm not perfect now. I still have hard days. I still carry regrets. But for the first time, I don't feel like I'm pretending. I feel like I'm living. And that, more than anything, feels like a beginning. Sometimes, the people who catch us at our worst end up helping us become our best. If you've ever felt like no one noticed you. If you've ever gone to bed beside someone who didn't really see you. If you've ever reached for something, or someone, not because you wanted to betray what you had, but because you were drowning in silence. Then maybe this story made you feel something you'd been too scared to admit. So let me ask you, honestly, without judgment, what would you do if someone you loved crossed a line, but came to you not with excuses, but with open hands, asking for help instead of punishment? Would you shut the door? Would you forgive them? Would you even know how to begin the conversation? I'm not here to tell you what's right or wrong. I'm just here to say, you're not alone. Not in your mistakes. Not in your healing. Not in your confusion. If this story touched you in any way, please take a second to like, share, and subscribe. It lets us know these stories matter.